All right, we'll start in a few minutes. If you guys want to pull up slides, they're on GitHub already. Mm-hmm. Sure. It's what?
Also, guys, Sunday 2 p.m. we have a meeting workshop. Sunday 2 p.m. Should get a room.
Tomas, honestly, if we're thinking about buying Sketch, we should buy it before the class. Will you be?
I mean, you don't necessarily have to. If you like, I mean, it's more. It's going to be more than Sketch. It's going to be about like colors and stuff in that way. But I mean, Sketch is going to be a pretty big deal, like part of it. If you want to buy it, or you're going to buy something like that eventually, you could as well buy it now.
Okay.
Sketch has a 30-day trial, doesn't it?
Also possible, yes. I don't know about that company pays for it, but it's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, if it does, guys, download it for Sunday because it's going to be so much nicer if you can actually follow along by doing the same things in Sketch. And if you're going to try to download it all on Sunday, it's not going to work.
All right, everyone's set up. We're going to get started. The first part today is going to be primarily lecture. So last class we learned to programmatically build our views, right, and add our positioning, create our positioning vis-a-vis springs and struts. However, springs and struts that have a few limitations, which we're going to do a review shortly. And it's also the old method of laying out our views, right? The new hotness as of the past 2 years is auto layout, and it's the default way to lay out our views. It's not forced upon us, but it is a default. We can override the default by using springs and struts that we did in this class. But again, auto layout is recommended, therefore it's the default. So we're going to learn to build our layouts through Interface Builder using auto layouts. We're going to learn to do this in code. And we're going to spend a bit of time going over differences between auto layouts and springs and struts. And today's subject is going to be all auto layouts. It's not going to be as many different topics, but auto layout can be a pretty big beast even for professional developers. So we're going to cover a good portion of auto layout functionality, but we're not going to cover every single edge case available to us because we can go into oblivion talking about different ways of using auto layout to implement our layouts. So before we get started, let's do a quick review. Benefits of drawing in code. If we programmatically display views, right? If we display a view based on an action. If we need to programmatically remove items, add items, conditionally show things, hide things, create things. Creating things programmatically is more efficient. We don't need to create them in our interface builder and hide them and then show them based on conditions, which gives us cleaner code, cleaner interface build storyboards, nibs, etc., etc. And also in springs and struts, it's pretty straightforward, right? Essentially, the way they work, we have a parent view, right? A super view. And the way that the sub view reacts is totally contingent upon the parent view, right? How are you guys feeling about this concept so far from last class? Was everyone able to complete the classwork? Yeah? Cool. And again, difference between springs and struts. Which one is the spring?
Sizing. Well, they're all sizing.
They're all sizing, right?
Spring is when you want to extend it. Versus
Uh-huh.
strut is whenever you want to
Place it.
launch
Yeah. That was my co-instructor for back-end class. We just knocked on the door. We taught a couple classes together. Cool. So, anyone want to share their project, their classwork from last time? Just as a quick review before we jump into auto layouts. Call on somebody. No? I'm gonna wave. Anybody? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? Yeah. Front row. Dave, do you have yours?
Which?
The classwork, finishing springs and struts. The assignment. You built the whole scene programmatically, and you laid it out using auto resize mask. Exactly.
What will we finish?
So creating it programmatically, placing the elements, the objects on our scene, and then loading a different view, different scene programmatically.
With the exercise on
Let's see if I have it.
Raise your hand, Rob. Did you raise your hand? Is that yours?
No, I showed you what I did last class. But I didn't tie it to another view controller.
Okay.
It's all programmatic.
Okay. You want to show us that?
Without
Here we go. Thank you.
I haven't looked at this for a long time, so I have no clue what I wrote here, but we'll see.
Yeah, sorry, I had the wrong microchip.
It's okay.
It doesn't go anywhere though, right?
That was one of the last to do. Is one of the bonuses to show another view. Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't get the view, but I don't even know if this was the assignment, but I just wanted to draw something fun. I added some animations. I'm going to run it so that you can see what it's doing first.
Nice.
Press it.
Love it. Cool.
So then you can restart it.
I use the star.
The stars. Okay, good question. So I started with this image that I just made in PowerPoint because I make everything PowerPoint. But I took that image as a PNG and then I drew it out using this for loop. So started with this one and just drew the 10 rows. And then I kept, and then I did that obviously again for each row, so 50 stars total. Right? Does that make sense or not?
Do you have the timer? Does it don't all appear at the same time?
Yeah, and then the delay I put integrated inside that loop. I had a lot of help from Tomas. But you can see I defined this variable as a delay. It started, the delay actually works differently from the stripes and the stars. The stripes are just UI views. And then this line right here is a really simple for statement. Or no, if statement, I'm sorry. Right, what's it called?
If else.
Yeah, if else.
Operator.
So pretty much this is what it's asking, like if the row is even, and then you separate with a question mark, and this is the first thing that happens. Separate with
This is
a
amazing, guys.
column, and then this is the second thing that happens.
If you have 5 lines of code to do if, and then your statement, else, your statement, and your closing bracket, it's horrible. I like using these a lot.
It's called a turning operator. It's available in most programming languages. Basically, it's short form for if-else statements.
Simple.
So you set, just walk me through it for a second. So you set the colors to 1 and 2. Is that what it is?
No, the columns are red or blue, but depending on the row.
The I right here is going to run through the loop, right? So it's going to, if I printed it down in the console, it would show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'm just asking if it's even or odd.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And not equal to 0.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I'm using this I right here that's tying to this.
This is Objective-C half of it, but you get what it means, right? So instead of having these 5 lines of code, it's just in 1 line. And this is the same statement we're checking for in that before the question mark.
And where is that line? Is that the colored box, background color equals I? And
Yes, this one.
Yep.
Yep.
Not to be picky, but shouldn't it have been for I in 1 to 13?
To 13?
Just kidding.
Oh yeah, exactly. It was tough to actually get it to be dynamic to screen sizes, but I guess that's what we learned last class. So.
Cool. So your action is how are you starting the animation and the laying out of the views?
It's just simply clicking the button right here. So once I click the button, then everything in this starts. Yeah, oh, that was fun.
Cool, very cool. And the restart is removing everything, or are you redoing the animations?
So yeah, that's one thing that I couldn't figure out, and I didn't look at this after we left. Oh, I guess I did. I don't know. Guess it's redoing the animations.
Cool.
Yep.
Very nice. Anybody else want to share? Okay, we can get started. Any remaining questions on springs and struts? We'll keep doing quick review before we move on. We'll cover mostly the negatives and the limitations. But before we move on, anybody have any outstanding questions on layouts and springs and struts thus far?
So I could figure out how to present it.
So this was part of the assessment lesson, right? And that was the one that I said you don't have to do it via programmatically. You can just display that with something you already built in interface builder. So, what are our limitations for springs and struts? What can we not do with springs and struts so far? What issues did we run upon?
Well, I know in auto layouts, you can set the width of an object to be equal to the width of another object.
We can kind of do that already, though, can't we? When you draw the rectangle.
So they don't recognize what's around them.
Yeah, exactly. They don't recognize what's around them, right? With springs and struts, all we know is our parent, right? So if I draw something here, it's only relative to my parent. So if I have another thing here that needs to always be below my first square, there is no way for me to figure out where my first square is unless I go through every single scenario and case and do a whole bunch of conditional checks, right? So they are pretty dumb when it comes to knowing objects around them. So if I want to put something on my right corner of this view, great. I want to size something to be flexible whenever this view switches, it's great. But anything else, when we have richer layouts with things that are dependent upon each other, things are getting very messy, right? It's not impossible to do things in only springs and struts. I mean, that's what we had available for the longest time. Actually, this will get available longer than auto layout. We're going to reach the halfway mark soon, but it's not very pleasant, right? What else? So placing things, sizing things, right? If I want this thing to be the size of this, or if I have 3 items here and I want these to be the same height and the same width, no matter what size of my screen, these things do not change according to each other, right? So it's much more difficult to do things that are equidistant, that are equal widths, equal heights, etc., etc.
Here, if you wanted to do it programmatically, you would say something like each of these 3 blocks needs to be something like 1/3 of the parent minus however points you want for the margin.
Sure, sure. But then what if we had another condition where we wanted like a box below them and a box above them, right? Or maybe if we then wanted to move these things, animate them into another box, if the user like drag them, right? Again, it's possible, but we have to take lots of workarounds, right? So springs and struts are great for very simple layouts, for putting things in corners, making things flexible according to the parent. But they're really painful to work with when we start associating elements with each other when they're sister views, right? When they're on the same level. So this is where we enter auto layout. Essentially, auto layout lets us draw on our interfaces to something called constraints. And we've already been a little bit exposed to constraints. So automatically, when we drag objects into our scenes, we have little blue guidelines, right? And now the blue guidelines are universal. They depending on whether we're in auto layouts or auto resizing mask, or also known as springs and struts. Those guidelines work for both. But essentially, those guidelines, what they do is they help us place our elements. We'll go over very shortly how that works. But we've already been slightly exposed to some of the properties of the layout. And also note, from this point on, everything we do is going to be universal view, right? So far, we've only been working on compact view, right? And it's important to also note this for a second. So this is the view we've been working with so far, right? Now, one thing to note as we change things on layout, this still comes in useful if we want to filter our views. So if we want to have objects that only show in iOS portrait view, we put them in here, right? So if I drag like a label on my compact any view and I go to my universal view, it won't be available, right? Whereas vice versa, it's available. So if we want to add objects that are specifically available for those views, you can select the views themselves. However, when you add things to our universal view, they'll be visible throughout all resolutions and all devices.
So can you do something for any, but then still restricted to portrait mode, for example?
You can to go. We're not going to go through today, but you can. So with the additional flexibility comes additional complexity for auto layout. So there's 2 methods of laying things out through auto layout. We can do it through interface builder. We can do NS layout constraints, which is a programmatic way of setting our constraints. And again, don't worry about the constraints keyword. We're going to go over that in just 5 minutes. And then there's another format, which is called VFL, which is called visual formatting language, right? But we're not going to touch it today. There's no reason. We can do pretty much everything in NS layout constraints, and teaching 3 methods of doing something is I think counterproductive. If you guys have any desire to move forward, I actually have resources I'll share after class for auto layout and VFL. But the method we're going to cover today should be applicable and should work for any situation. So constraints. Constraints are essentially how auto layout works. And the way we work with constraints so if you have an object here, what we had with springs and struts, we were making a few assumptions. We conditionally either edit flexible width, flexible height, flexible whatever margin, right? But those are all choices. With auto layout, we need to give it a way to figure out the width, a way to figure out the height, and a way to figure out its positioning. So the width, we can set the width explicitly. So I can say I want the width to be 200 points. Same thing with the height. I can also set the width to be equal to something else. So I can have the width be the width of the sister element. I can have the height be a sister or brother element. I can also have it be something that's in another hierarchy as well. So it's totally flexible. But what's important with constraints is we need to have a place of origin. So where are we getting the values from? Is it an already existing object, or are we just setting those ourselves? So that's the from. And we also have to set the to being our actual element, right? And then we also give it the properties that we're changing, whether it's the width, whether it's the top, whether it's the left, the right, or the bottom. So we need to give them associations. So for me to place this box over here, I need to tell it to have a width, a height. I need to tell it to be X amount of points from the y-axis and X amount of points from the x-axis, right? So that is the very bare minimum. I need to, just like with spring and struts over here, I'm putting this in the very left corner by giving it an X and a Y origin and giving it the width and height. Now, another way for me to place this, I can have another element over here, we'll call this blue box. And we'll make the assumption the blue box already has a width and a height and a location, right? So what I can say with this is I want to draw the square that's exactly the same width and the same height as my blue box. And I want this to always stay this distance or equidistant from the blue box. So that's my x-axis. And I need to set it so it's always proportional to my top axis, right? So I'm setting my width and height to be equal to my width and height over here. I'm setting my distance to be the distance I originally set in my interface builder or my code. And I'm also setting my distance from the top. Again, either through interface builder or code.
Should your distance between the two objects should be variable? Because what if you have, you turn it on the side, or if you have an iPad, like that distance cannot be fixed.
Yes, so that's one of the main conditions, right? So Alex's point was a good one, where if this thing was turned, right, should this be variable so this stays here? And that depends widely on where this is, or if there's anything in between. So again, key takeaways here before we demonstrate are we need the from, which is what we're creating, our to, where we're drawing our properties from. And both of those need the attributes, right? So my from needs to be the width or the location, or or the top or the left side of one of my elements. And then the to needs to be the thing that we're getting from the other object. So if I want two boxes to touch together, so if I had this box over here, and I had a box that I wanted to lay right here, I set the width and the height to be from this one and to this one, right? Or to this one and from this one, sorry, I messed up. And then this gets the left side of this object and applies it to the right margin of this object. So the two are directly correlated. So this works with super views. So if just like springs and struts, but it also works with sister elements. So before we could not make assumptions on two objects that were in the same level. Now there's a couple of other properties you need to remember, and again, we'll go over this in code. Multiplier. So when we apply properties from one object to another, we can have them inherit exactly the same number of points. So if my left side ends at a certain axis, I can have my right side of the other object start at the same place, or I can multiply it by 2, or divide it by 2 so they're crossing. Same thing with width. If I inherit the width of this property, this object, I can do the width and then have a multiplier of 2, so it'll be twice that width. And constant is points that we add, so I can add additional points to that width. Or if I'm just setting the size of something manually without inheriting properties from somewhere else, that will always be set in constants.
So why, and like, can you give us an example of when this gets really complex?
When you have like,
I guess it's just like the way you've laid it out, it doesn't seem from that description like it's wildly different.
I mean, the more elements you have on your screen, does make it easier. I mean, with 2, it's pretty straightforward, but
imagine a face here, and you switch this around, right? What happens to these faces? So we'll go over that. I think you're gonna wish you hadn't asked the question, but they get pretty complex. When it comes to simple layouts, it's not rocket science. But when it comes to nesting lots of views together and having lots of objects that are reliant upon other objects, it gets pretty complex. We have to actually do some math.
Does everything have to have a constant? The constraint has to have at least one constant.
Yes. The constant could be 0, but you need to have a constant property in there. This thing is. Let me see here. There we go. So let's do a quick, again, practice here, and I'll draw this out. So if I have some image, scene here, and if I have some image, and some image has an attribute of the right side, so this right here, right? And then I also have a label. So my label is hello world. So we also have to set a relation. This is one thing that we didn't go in too much in detail with. And most of the relations we're going to set are equals. We'll go over other options soon, but basically, what we're saying is, I want the right side of this view to be where the left side of my hello world label is. So these two are touching. Multiplier 1, that means essentially the number of points stays the same. So if my label's left side here is at, let's say, 50 points, my right side here will be at 50 points. The multiplier, what it does is it multiplies this value by whatever we set in there. So times 1 means that it's here, right? If I had a multiplier of 0.5, this will be pushed a bit more this way.
Would it be pushed more, or would it be half as large?
No, so we're setting just the right side, right? We're not setting the width over here. So for the next exercise, does someone want to draw? Draw the next exercise. I'm going to put up the next problem here in a second. So here's our requirements. The from view is some image, and we're going with the attribute of width, and we're inheriting from some label, and that's also width, and the relation is equals. However, the multiplier is 0.5.
Okay, so so it's from some image. Okay, so say this is my image here. So if I understand, so we're gonna worry about the width. Let's say I don't know. Yeah, and so now we have the label. We don't know where the label is, but let's assume the label is right next to it. And then the attribute of the labels is going to be 0.5 of the width, so it would be right. And I have no idea what the multiplier is, but the constant zero, what is it?
So constant zero means additional points you might want to add. So that's right, except for it's reversed. Where the to view is the label. So the
so it's the opposite.
Exactly. So the
this
label
is gonna
is.
be, and this is going to be.
Actually, what did you say the constant was?
So the constant is additional points that we add to that equation over there. So if the label.
So the from basically is pointing to the label as a reference, right?
So the from is pointing to the element that we're working with, the object we're working with. So in our case, it's some image. And we're saying we want to draw the width attribute from some label. Right? So if the label is 100 points wide, we draw 100 points here, but we multiply by.
Yeah. And so what, can you give an example of when you would say constant zero? What would happen if you say constant 1? Is it just.
So then you add another point to the width of some image.
Oh, okay. So you can make width that are like that rely on multiple different factors.
Yeah. So the label in this instance is what? It's twice as large as our image.
So,
Thank you.
I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not getting confused between from and to, but would the right way to think about it, since this is constraints, be to say we're constraining the width of some image
Exactly.
based on some label.
Exactly. Yeah. So the from property is always the thing that you're manipulating. The to property is the thing that you're inheriting from. The object you're inheriting from. Okay.
Can you say that again? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so the from is the object that we are changing, and the to is the object that we are gathering the attributes from, that we're mirroring the attributes from. Now, the to doesn't have to be a label, it can also be our super view, right? So if I have my to, if I have that as my super view, I can get properties from there and change my width or my positioning based on my super view. And how do we access our super view? Our main view? Self-left view. So I'll start, I'll give you a quick demo doing this in Interface Builder, and then we'll go through doing some code. And the exercise we did, it's still the same properties apply to both Interface Builder and code, but I think it'll be a bit easier if we go into Interface Builder first, and then do all this in code. So let's start a new project. And I'll call this auto layout.
Universal.
Universal, yep. Everything from this point on, guys, will be universal.
We select universal, you had
Did I? Yes, select universal.
So universal is
Any, yep.
And then when you're other devices, it has to say universal.
Yeah. So we want to have any here.
When you're creating the project, they'll give you an option, iPhone, iPad.
Universal, yep. Now, what are benefits of having universal apps?
Well, you only code it for that one time for Apple's device.
Yeah. So ideally, again, this might not always be a scenario, but we have one code base and one in the same scenes for all devices, right? So we can implement our app or game into iPad, iPhone, and whatever Apple devices we have available at the time, just by setting our layouts in universal. Now, there might not always be the same scenario because job to be done in iOS and job to be done in iPad might not always be the same thing, right? But we have that ability now. Cool. So I'll go and draw our login layout, and then we'll do a quick exercise. So let's start with a text field. And you see when we drag, we have all our guidelines, right? Actually, let's make it a bit more fun. Let's do a Pac-Man. I'm gonna do a UI view. So I'm gonna drag a UI view on here and resize it to be a little bit smaller for now. So this will be our Pac-Man, and let's change the background to this to be yellow. Yeah, delete the label. We'll just do Pac-Man because we can keep adding ghosts. So yellow UI view. Everybody have this?
what's the first element that you dragged in?
I removed the first element.
So it's,
We're just doing a UI view that has a yellow background. I want us to get familiar with the interface builder methods of debugging first. There's quite a few things, quite a few new tools that we're going to get familiar with. So there's a few ways for us to set our constraints. And again, constraints are essentially what make up our auto layout. We have to set certain relationships for our objects, right? So the first way of setting our constraints, in our bottom right corner over here, you have this pin icon, second from the left. So over here, there's a few things going on. First of all, our top view is how we are placing this in relation to our parent frame, right? So in relation to this scene, how we're placing our UI view. So over here, we can set positioning for our top, left, right, and bottom. So I'll start with my top and left. I'll set this 20 points from the top, 20 points from the left. So what would happen if I set this 20 points from the right and 20 points from the bottom?
You're gonna do conflict.
A conflict by?
Because your thing cannot be at the same time 20 points because it's too small. You cannot be 20 points on your screen, right?
So
Unless it stretches.
it does stretch, right? So that's one of the confusing parts about a layout is we need to come to an absolute way of having width and height, but that way does not always have to be by explicitly saying the width is this. We can have the width be inferred by our margins of our parent view, right? So if I do 20, 20, 20, 20, it'll be 20 from the bottom, 20 from the left, 20 from the top, and 20 from the right, and my width will be inferred, right? We'll leave this as this for now. Let's also select our width and heights. All this is doing right now, selecting our width and heights, is saying that we are, at this point, no matter what orientation we're on, and no matter what size our screen, our width and height will always be the size. We are setting explicit constraints on our sizes right now. So we're setting explicit constraints on our sizes and our X and Y coordinates. Now, before we do anything, we're going to want to, under update frames, we're going to select items of new constraints. So what this does is, if I was not to select that and press update, this would not actually move my element. This would leave it as is and give me a whole bunch of warnings. And I'll show you what it looks like in a second. So for now, we'll go ahead and select items of new constraints. And we should have seen our box move. So if I run this, I think I'm. There we go. Right. So now if I rotate, we are stuck on our left and right. Questions so far? Now, there are two ways for us to reference our constraints before we move on. First way, if we go in our document outline, which is our bottom left icon over here, under our view, we'll see the constraints right there. And we can select constraints explicitly. So one thing that we're noticing here is when I select my constraint in the document outline, my constraint is actually outlined on the interface builder. So this is very telling of how constraints work. Constraints are actually objects that we instantiate. They're not properties of our objects, they're actually objects that are associated with our views. So they're like their own elements that are helping us space things out. This is a very important thing to remember.
So it's not like you've actually defined like this object is going to be this far. You're thinking about like you're inserting an object between the frame and this one that happens to be 20 points.
Exactly.
Sorry, how did you get that?
So this is the document outline. It's the bottom left.
Oh, okay.
Now, through our interface builder, through our document outline, we can actually go ahead and remove elements as well. We can just press delete there. No need to do that yet. And after our interfaces get, we have quite a few objects in there and quite a few constraints. This is a very clean way of actually selecting our constraints. When we have a lot of objects in our layouts, in our scenes, it might get difficult to select specific constraints. So be sure that when we have our more advanced views, our more I guess exciting views, select your constraints from here. Yeah. So as we get more and more, as our layouts get more and more, I guess, intricate and advanced, you have more constraints on there. You will have constraints right next to each other. So at times it will be difficult to select constraints. So very often you'll actually select your constraints from here. Also, it's possible for us to manipulate our interface builder constraints in code. So we can actually drag and drop an outlet from our constraint to our view controller, which we'll do soon. Okay, so second way we can access our constraints is in our size inspector and select the object. You will see all of its constraints listed over here. So the way I usually approach this is whenever I want to, for some reason, manipulate something through interface through code and drag and drop a constraint from my interface builder to code, I use the document outline to drag and drop to make a connection, right? To drag an outlet. And whenever I want to tweak a constraint, I usually do through here. So if you select edit for one of the constraints, it lets you edit the constraint right from here.
Also, some of you guys, if you have like the same thing 2 or 3 times in there, it's going to be like a lot of blue lines. You can select one and just press delete because it might say like width equals 111, and then width is greater or and or equals 111. You can like delete the ones that you don't want over here too.
Yeah, and as we're laying things out, that will happen. You will have duplicate constraints. Xcode, we'll find out soon. We'll learn how to debug constraints shortly, but Xcode is very good at telling you, warning you about these things. So we'll learn how to listen for those warnings. So we've gone over constants so far, right? That's the number of points of distance or whatever constant we're setting, size, position, etc., etc. We know multiplier. There's another property here called priority, and we'll understand what that means soon. So all constraints also have priorities. So constraints can take precedence over other constraints. Questions so far? So if I want to remove my constraints, I can either remove them from my document outline, or I can select and remove them from here. Just highlight them, click on them, and press delete. Cool. Questions so far? So let's add another view in here, start making things a bit more exciting. And we'll make this a ghost. So ghost and Pac-Man are all colors, right? So let's make this one, let's go with red. So the first way we set our constraints was through our pin menu over here, right? The other way of us setting our constraints is by just doing control and drag. So for my ghost over here, I can have my ghost be equidistant from the right side. So I drag and drop, control and drag to my right side. And the way that we set the distance between our object and the right side of our scene, we select the first property that says trailing space to container margin. So I held down control on my object. I dragged to the right side. Right. So this draws our first constraint. So we know where to hook it to our right side now, right? What's missing?
Vertically.
Vertical, right? Why not the left? Because we already have the right side and we have the sides, right?
Oh, okay.
So to pin it to our top, I drag and drop to the top. And we do top space, the top layout guide. Now, one thing to observe here is that our guidelines are orange. So our guidelines vary in 3 colors. We have blue, which means that everything is cool. There's orange, which means there's a warning. And then there's red, which means that there's something horribly wrong with the things. So the way we look at our warnings is in our document outline. We see an arrow at the top of our scene. And Xcode is really good at telling us what the problems are. So right now, it's yelling at us because we have a right side and a top side, but it says we're missing a height, right? We're missing a width. So back to case point, originally we didn't think we needed a left because we thought that we had set the width. However, we haven't explicitly set a constraint for the width. So the way we do this is we either give it a left margin, drag it to the left side, and make it equidistant to the left side, or we give it a width. And same thing happens with the height. So for my width, I'm going to set the constraint from here. Yep.
When you manipulated the right side and the top, we didn't really set any number of points. We just dragged it out.
Yep. I'll show you in a second, because I want us to do the width and height as well. So when we pin things, we pin our objects, we see we have values for width and height already. They're just not selected. So this width and height are the current size of our object. So for us that are constraints, we just checkbox both the width and the height. And our next step is to update frames, but for now we're not going to do that. We'll just press OK or add to constraints. So you see the errors went away, right? Because now our object has a set width, a set height, and a set place.
I got like a dotted line box next to it. I got like a sister.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened with Mary is, and it should have happened here too, actually. Actually, no, it shouldn't have because the place stays still. So when we update our frames, when we set our constraints, and we don't select update frames from our pin menu, it doesn't automatically move our object. So the way we do that is we select our object, and then we select this triangle little menu here, and you select update frames. So if you had a little dotted line, either next to it or around it, you have to do update frames.
Or in your document outline, you would get a yellow warning sign, and you can click in there and also do the same thing, update frames.
So before I do a quick recap here, let's run this. Right. So what's happening here, the red box is always equidistant to the right side, always equidistant to the top side, and then it also always has a set width and height.
Essentially, between the yellow and the red, you just showed us 2 different ways to set constraints.
Yes.
Either typing it in or drag, control drag.
Yep. So Ali had a question about our constraints for our red ghost here, right? The question was, we drag and drop from our object to each one of our sides, but we never really gave it a value, right? So by default, when we drag and drop, it takes the element as it stands in our interface builder, if you want to change those, we go into our size inspector and set those values over here, right? So I set my trailing space. Again, trailing is the right side of the object, and leading is the left side. I'll set my trailing space to 20. And I'll set the top to 20 as well. So this one is equidistant from the top and the left and the right. So if we want to reset our numbers for our constraints, we select the object and go in our size inspector and select edit on the appropriate constraints.
Yeah. It'll automatically update. You don't have to go to the triangle.
Yeah, it'll automatically update. Now there are certain situations where there's objects that are dependent on that, and those you have to go and update. But we'll get to that. So far, so good. Any questions? So the right side of an object is the trailing side, right? Left side is the leading. We can also refer to those by right and by left, which will go through the code. Top and bottom are pretty straightforward, the same naming convention. And remember, when we set constraints, we also have to give it a width and height, right? So it's important to understand constraints. We need to tell it size and position. And the size can be inferred based on position, right? Because if I have a constraint that it's 20 pixels from the left and a constraint that is 20 pixels from the right, it means that it'll be the full size of the scene minus 40 pixels, right? Or points, right?
Aspect ratio is another one that we can use, which is also pretty cool to like have inferred sizes and the heights or widths.
Yeah, we'll go through that. So let's add another ghost here, and let's have this ghost always be on Pac-Man's ass. So the ghost will always be like 50 points from Pac-Man. No matter where Pac-Man goes, the ghost will always be behind it, right? So I'm gonna just drag another ghost here. Now, one thing to note here is when we duplicate a view, it also copies its height and width constraints. So I'm gonna remove those so we can do this from scratch. So I'm gonna select and remove. And I'll make this ghost a different color. Purple is one of them, right? So when we duplicated this UI view, it also brought over the constraints. So I went in the size inspector, I selected the constraints and removed them from the new. Just delete.
Just removed all the constraints.
From the new ghost, yeah. All right. So for the constraints for our new ghost, let's make it the same size as its little brother, and let's make it so it's always 50 points distant from our Pac-Man. So we'll start with that. So for us to, through Interface Builder, set equal heights and equal width, we control drag to the object we want to compute those properties from. And just like with everything else we've done so far, we can select multiple of those properties. The way we do this is we hold down Shift. So we do Shift, and I'll do width, and I'll do height. Yeah. Yeah, so I just drag and dropped from the purple to the red box, and I held shift and did both width and height on the constraints.
And that wants them to be equal.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you change the width and height of the red box, would the purple automatically change?
Yes. Yep. Sorry. Well, don't worry about that right now, but yes. Yeah.
What if in the case of the yellow box, they're different sizes and you want it to be the same, can you choose which one you want to be?
So if you want to make the yellow box the same as one of these sizes,
Like if you want to make purple the same as yellow, but they're two different sizes, so you can't lock them, so you drag and drop.
you can. Yeah, they don't have to be the same. So even if they're different sizes here, you can drag here and do equal width and equal height, and the size of this will change based on that.
Based on the larger one.
Yeah.
No, based on one where.
Based on
you're
one where you're-
from.
where you're getting from.
Okay.
So we set our equal heights, equal widths. So next thing we want to do is set our purple goes to be a certain distance from our yellow box. So just like we did drag and drop to the red box, we'll just drag and drop from purple to yellow. And we'll select vertical spacing. So you'll see that this adds a guideline between our purple ghost and our Pac-Man. Now remember, because constraints are objects, you can select constraints in our interface builder. And we can change its properties. So if I want the distance to be 50 points instead of 84 points, I can either select the object and then go in my vertical top space, or I can select the constraint here directly and change the constant to 50. So I physically selected the constraint and I set the constant to 50. So if you select the object that has a constraint, you can then select the constraint itself. And remember, you can also select it from our document outline. So we're missing one step, right? So we know the size, we know the width and height, and we know its y-axis, right? So what's missing?
X-axis.
The x-axis, right? So let's make the x-axis so it's this far away from the left side. So I'll drag from the purple to the left side. And again, left side is usually called leading space. So we drag and drop from our purple box to the left side, and we select the first option, which is leading space. So we have everything we need, but we're still getting warnings, right? We're still getting these outlines here in our orange frames. So what we have to do, we've set all these properties, but we haven't actually updated our interface builder. So this is where we go in and we update our frames. So if you click on our third little menu here on the bottom, and we do update frames, it will move everything to their appropriate spots and resize them accordingly. If I run this, our purple will be the same size as the red, and it will be below the yellow. Cool. Questions so far?
In real life, you're not doing this in interface builder, though, right? You're not doing this all programmatically.
No, I'm doing interface builder all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You do it programmatically for objects that you create programmatically. The cool thing is that we can also, after we set things in interface builder, we can then change them later programmatically based on
Oh, really?
interface changes. So we'll go over that.
that hard to keep track of this?
It can be. It can be. Yeah. All right. So things to remember here are we need for every object again. I'm going to keep repeating this at the end of class. We need to always have a width and a height, and we always need to have a position. X and Y. And again, because X and Y, if you have two X's and two Y's, means that it has a finite start and end, right? So if we have two X's and two Y's, then we don't necessarily need a width and a height, right? Because if we have,
You define the leading and the trailing space.
exactly, if I have this object here, then object starts here and ends here, and then starts here and ends here. It'll be defined just from our coordinates, from our positions, right? So in this instance, we don't need to give it a width and height. So constraints are things that we need just enough to place our element, and does not change the rules of us drawing our views, right? We still need to have a position and a size, but again, the size cannot be inferred based on a position.
And what if there's a conflict between, let's say, when we created it, we told it was one size, is the constraint always meant?
Constraint always overrides the size. So that was actually a very good question. So Mary asked, what if this thing had a width and we set a constraint for a width? The constraint will override that.
So one other question. When we drag and drop outlets from interface builder to Swift file, right? There was actually a representation of the outlet code, right? That showed up in the Swift file. Where do you see this other than interface builder? Are there other representations?
Are there
behind?
programmatic representations? Yeah, let's actually go for it right now. So Mary's question is, how do we access these constraints through code, right? Right? Is that
Yeah,
more or
yeah.
less? So we can actually, again, remember, our constraints are all objects. So we can actually drag and drop our constraint from interface builder. And it's good practice here, guys, to not drag and drop from interface builder, but drag and drop from our document outline, because it'll be very easy for us to, when we have a lot more guidelines, to accidentally drag and drop the wrong constraint or the wrong object. So I'm gonna do the horizontal space. Nope, that's not the one. This horizontal space over here, or vertical space over here. Where is it? Bless you. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Huh? Constraints, right? So views have constraints.
Also, guys, if you would later on, now it's not necessary to name these guys, but like select the name, press enter. These would also update, and it would be easier to find the right one. So you could call this purple, yellow, and red.
Yeah. And when you drop this, you're dragging and dropping the view, right? Not the constraint.
The constraint.
Drag and dropping the
Yeah.
constraint, does that automatically pull the view?
Nope, just a constraint.
Because it's weird, it's just looking at this file so far, it doesn't have any representation of the squares that you have in each of these.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that's kind of intuitive, right? Because we're now just manipulating the constraints of code, not the views. But that's the purpose today. We're going to manipulate constraints, because constraints is how we change the size and position of our views.
So once you, let's say you renamed it, once you pull them over, does it take those names so that you know what the constraints are for?
Nope.
Those names are like only
So you know
applicable
what.
here. They don't have anything to do with your subbing code. That would be an outlet that you drag, and you can even rename them after you drag your outlet. That wouldn't
Yeah.
affect it.
The purpose of renaming things here is just for your own sanity. After you have like 100 constraints and like 20 different views, you want to add naming conventions so you know what everything is. So, I'm going to drag and drop this vertical space between my purple ghost and my Pac-Man. So just like with everything else, we control drag. And you'll see that the type here is NS layout constraint. And we want to be very, very explicit, just like with everything else in our naming convention. So I'll call this vertical spacing between purple ghosts and Pac-Man. Long name, but no one will ever complain about it not making sense. Cool. So we have access constraint. Our constraint by default is 50 points, right? So let's make it do something. Let's change this. For us to change the distance for this, let's add a button. And we'll have the button increase distance between Ghost and Pac-Man. So it's also as an exercise, add constraints for our button. I'm gonna make this a different color here, a different background color, so we can easily see what's going on. It's not very pretty. So I want to place my button so it's centered horizontally, no matter what. And so it's always about 50 points from the bottom. So first and foremost, the one we're familiar with is tying it to the bottom. So again, click and drag to the bottom of the screen. And we'll select bottom space to bottom layout guide. So we have our vertical constraint, right? So next we need the horizontal constraint. So if I click and drag from my button to really any direction, actually, I think it'll just be, yeah. If you click and drag horizontally, either up or down, and then select center horizontally in container. So this is our center X property. So I drag this to either up or down vertically, and I selected center horizontally in container. So far, so good. So we have our button. Our button is anchored to the bottom, and it's also horizontally aligned to the center, right? So the purpose of our button here was so we could click it and increase the space between these two things, between our ghost and our Pac-Man. So if we drag and drop, just like a normal action, make this an action, and I'll say increase distance between Pac-Man, and Ghost. Cool. So now we can change the distance, right? So now I can say vertical, which is self, right? Self dot vertical spacing between purple ghost and Pac-Man. And do you guys remember the unit of measure for the property that we set the distance between things? Points is the unit of measurement, but there was, in reference to auto layout, there was the last thing. So that was a constant. And I will make this 80.
Hey, I'm trying to change the background of the button. I just have a default background image.
Probably could change the image. So if you scroll lower down, there should be a background.
Oh.
So it's a whole bunch of stuff we did without checking our work. So let's run this. We have our button, and when we press it, it moved our ghost slightly down, right? It set it to 80, so it didn't add, right? So what we could do is we could do plus equals 80, add 80, right? So far, so good?
Yeah, so for some reason, my increased distance button is up at the top, so I didn't set the.
So you need to save that about.
So let's make this a bit more exciting, because what's really cool about constraints is we can also animate constraints, right? So let's try this. So far, we're familiar with UI view animate, right? Animate with duration. And we'll give it a duration of 1 second. And we'll give it the animations.
You don't have to have nil for your animations.
And we're not doing nil because our animation is what's happening here. Right? Animation nil was what, or true or false, was we didn't want to do transition stuff. We're explicitly doing an animation here. Uh-oh, didn't animate. So it didn't animate, right? Right. So then we animate. Not a what? Yeah, the bracket is closing down here. So we're actually going to change the constraint property up here. And we actually have to call a method to kind of draw the layout for the constraints within the animation. So the way we do that is to do self.view.layout if needed. So for us to have our constraints animate, remember we need to call this layout if needed in our animation method. After we change the constraints. To animate things, if a constraint changes, we lay out the constraint updates, and then we do UI animate with the layout update.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so first step, if I want to animate our constraints, is we change the constraints when I animate. So self.vertical spacing between purple close and Pac-Man. So spacing over here. Set it to something else. And we can also actually update other constraints as well. And after we've updated those constraints, for us to animate those changes, right afterwards, we need to do self, the view, the layout if needed within the animation method here.
And this is because we haven't created those objects programmatically. That we need to do that because I think in the previous time we just plugged directly that whatever the animation that we wanted to do, right? But it's because we had created them programmatically.
No, it's because before we were working with the objects themselves, and here we're working with the constraints. So this basically redraws for the tied objects and constraints.
I just got lost with the entire animation. I got the 80, that was fine.
Okay.
After that,
Oh, so far this makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So this is the main takeaway here, is for us to change the constraint, we have to reference the name that we dragged as an outlet and the value by using the constant property. That makes sense? Right, so we do vertical spacing between purple ghost and background that constant. That's what changes that value. The value is always a constant, right?
so that means upon pressing the button that I have over here, it will immediately set it to 100.
Exactly. And for us to animate this, just remember, I don't want to go too deep in the inner workings of it. For us to animate our constants, we have to do layout if needed method within the animation method. Just remember it for now as a hard rule. Stay around this again. Half a second, it'll change to 100 distance. Cool. Questions so far?
Yeah.
In what? Because animations, whenever we want to animate something, it always has to be in the functions within the animations. So anything we animate always has to be within the curly brackets. Yeah.
And 100 again in reference to where it is.
The 100 is this guideline over here.
The
So
distance.
originally this was 50, the distance. We're changing that to 100.
So if you press it a second time, you've already gone to 100. So when you do it a second time, it's just moved again another 100.
It's just gonna stay, right? If I wanted to add 100 instead of setting it to 100, what would I do?
Change that to constant.
Plus. Plus.
Or plus.
Plus equals.
That's 150.
All right. So let's do a quick exercise. Let's draw a little robot happy face. And let's give our robot 2 eyes. And each eye must be on the respective top, right, or left corners. These must always be the same size and width, same height and width. We must have a mouth, that's at the bottom, and a nose that is 50 points from the mouth. And for a bonus, let's make it so whenever you click on our view or do a gesture in our view, the mouth either gets larger or changes colors. Sure. Oh, it's a merge conflict. It's a merge conflict that is. To bring file.
Yeah.
No choice for
Where to
self.
bring the file.
So it works.
Yeah. You should have done the merge conflict file. Unless, so whenever you create a new project, whenever you select a single view, that view, those are actually templates they're drawing from. What could have happened is you could have those templates under version control, and somehow those templates which would be really weird. So I don't see how that would happen. You have to go through a team to do that. Yeah, let me just fix this by hand. For some reason, it's referencing the GitHub repository. So all you did was you went to create an extra project. You might have to save it under desktop. Yeah. Let me see. Let's see what's going on. You're getting best errors.
I'm wondering if it's for the same.
So you could possibly have two versions of Git running in the same folder. Possibly. So when you created this whole process, you went to a new project and just saved them to the class.
Which I think was, I made it file, that's what file.
Someone created the folder here. Yeah, it's something to do with folder. No, let's let's have the class and move it for now. You just save your work to desktop. Yeah. Yes. I think I know a solution, but it might take minutes. Yeah.
But it says negative 17.
Because there was a change since you last placed it there.
Right, so we have 2 frames, right?
Yeah, so let's see what happens. Can you click on the object itself? And then go up. So
And then you could.
it's okay, save the position at the bottom. But this right now does not have size.
Oh, okay.
It's
You
like-
want to set the size?
Yeah, exactly.
So you just control drag to the other object and you can set the same top. And you can start.
Yeah.
What am I thinking? So I'm thinking, right, let's do this. And I want it to be the top, you select, that's, you can save this to the top, right? So, okay, and then I would do this, this one from right.
So what is it? So let's see,
Oh, I guess because I didn't set that right. They don't.
well, so you have the top, right? So I think you actually click on, so you go here, and I think frames.
Yeah, that's what it goes. So if you go by.
Does that have to be?
Oh, see the top, but you don't have the side over here.
Okay.
So you don't have this.
Okay. And then.
Oh. But I didn't have one. So, right. So.
But how come this spacing is different?
Just because when you first placed it here, it was this where it was, right? So now you have to actually go in there and manually set spacing here. Spacing.
So
them. Yeah. So you're gonna set when you drag and drop here. You can set those properties. Because you can set equal top, right? And you can technically set the right side of this to the left side of this. But I wouldn't go that far. I would just manually drag the right.
Usually it should.
Every time I go to change this, and I submit changes, it moves something else elsewhere. So I'm trying to figure out why. So I always put that that's right.
Yeah.
Now, this position.
Don't worry about setting the because you've already set it. So then I think it's for now.
I know.
I will not go back to the other things like put it home. Okay, so now you have width and height. You have the distance between this and this.
Yeah.
What's
I
missing?
mean, this is expected to be right, because this is too wide, and you give it.
Oh, so this is much right, either.
Exactly.
Because you already defined it where it goes to that position.
So you're gonna set it horizontal axis.
Yeah.
So that's the next step.
So that's my step, and, oh, yeah, this way. That right, drag.
Yeah.
So drag it vertically.
Yeah.
And then you set horizontal. And not try not to get frames.
Oh, you reckon a triangle, right?
Yes. So
horizontal.
now does this have a position? So you said this to the top. So let's say this is the top because you want this to be tied to 5. So because this is tied to this, and this goes up spring, so it's that. So you need to. So this is at the bottom. This.
So you still have something. Thing is,
Oh, but this one does not have the size. That's why. So you also gotta set a width and height for this one. It's a bit
So basically, the steps are set, we figured out, with the price for all of them, and then the positioning.
Exactly that. Unless the positioning will dictate their width and height.
Yes, and in that case, you don't have to set a position.
Guys, a really quick tip. Really quick, put everything down for a second. So we can actually preview our actual layout without running every time and building every time. If you open up your assistant editor over here, on the top, instead of selecting automatic, go to preview and preview the storyboard. You can see what it looks like over here. And you can add all devices that you want to test under. So you can have iPhone, you can add an iPad, and you can keep stacking them. So you see what every. So under assistant editor, you select preview. So this is a bit more efficient than just building and running every time. Updates live.
I was just looking at this week. What you don't want to do is run laptops, right?
Right. Yeah, well, I gotta use it.
So the seed is and they're not right? So so it says you have to think of it like J, right? This happened based on this exactly. So I would always have to write the option Z. It's not really. So first thing we do so first thing is to do is and also just you're missing it from this room. And you probably have to center it out and then right? You give it a big split or you give it a 30 pixel on left and 30 points to the right and 30 points to the right and cancel it. I'm going to give it here. The UI complete container that's going to be sent to the small over. So I show you here.
And then open the screw.
Last thing, yeah, you would have still have to measure this here. So
Not self we're changing it.
It's so now you'll
So the gesture is in
perfect. So now you can do it to make sure that
but you focus my heart. You have to go in and click the gesture, reset on. So leave it as it's set out.
So it already sees this, right? Which is great. It doesn't have any content yet about like it's inside. So I know this is not right because you already added it. So if you would do this again, it will add another screen. So if I want to change the easy
So if you go here,
yeah. So it's one or the other. You either add here, yeah, 50 or you right. Yeah. So you can add left is
yes, the programmatically we created the gesture right here. So you have to do we edit, not really all edit. So because the edit interface builder, we just wait for now. We just set it up.
If I want to have both sides and right,
We get another one.
So now you have to get so this indicates if you need to makes sense, right? Give it so not virtual space. So probably the easiest way is just okay, so you went here, right? But in like you can be aware that you didn't do anything about this space. You gave me a space, like I know the main one. So or is it?
This isn't the next page, just click
Okay.
So it's happening.
that's more items.
You want this to be centered or something, right?
See, that means that you're still missing something.
Well,
You're not saying anything, so if you control triangle,
So what's happening?
no, you have to center.
It's confusing, but that's what you want because it's saying that I'm taking this and this is the middle and this is six.
Yep. Okay. This is the part.
So the other thing is, do you see it's so you can just fix this very easily. Like, as soon as I tell you what to do, it You give yourself perspective. That's why
First of all, whenever you do something consistent, this also centers this. Because the problem is you can't do that.
She's gonna say, okay,
So,
I'll let you drop your points.
the first thing is not to work. So is these were supposed to be private properties. But you're reading the same distance. So if you're setting the same distance,
If you were,
you're not going to
like
take
your center,
that's what this thing here is. But what we want to do is I really want to have the eyes focus on each one. Yeah. So here, exactly.
We should take that constant out.
Whatever I said. But like, Greg is one thing here, this guy over there, it's whatever. I mean, sometimes Greg is one, sometimes.
I've already tried that, but I
So
see
it's
actually
got- I
specify.
just, I do my initial conversion, and then.
So now I'm just going to see if you put this one.
See, like, look, these ones have 1, 2, 3, 4.
We got five, I would go over there.
Because now they're tied to the score.
That's what I did.
Very good.
Okay. So this is going to do with the width.
So the line says X.
Make those small eyes.
Because you put a trailing space here, then
It should in front of the.
it's not gonna be a line, it's always gonna differentiate it. So here,
So what?
if the trailing space is in space,
Right?
equal like
So
without space
what I
to
have
do
on this is a line set
and
up,
our
right?
space.
I have the width.
I think the only
But I should have it in the-
what you looking at.
Yeah, so you're going to need one, right? For this one.
Right.
For this one, you keep the height, because height needs to go. It's always going to be the same size.
And I have the bottom, right? Yes. But I did, I want to confirm the width from the side,
Exactly.
right?
So do you have a that's training?
Because otherwise your constraint would have been only to accept this is with and you need to do the same to this one.
So now you should see.
Moving it so that the thing is equal to the constant that you.
Now I'm going to go in there and set it because they're most likely the same size.
Just because
Okay, so that's 22.
if it's also that means you're
Yeah,
fine.
there.
So that
Oh, okay, good, okay, gotcha. Okay.
So then, and then
Let's,
this,
see this one.
so we keep.
No, you're okay.
My
So that means
dog
I
brains.
That's what other range does, right?
So everything's working.
So, with equal size of things, it's probably not what you want.
Basically, I would want to orient my thing.
So you want this guy to be always this amount of size from left and this side. So if you give it a fixed space with windows, that's not solid.
Oh.
Sorry.
So for this guy, you want
Instead
it,
of
Perfectly like,
Oh.
equal to equal to do that.
One has to have some
something.
width set.
so it already has that.
Yeah, you're right, you're right.
Top space equals and already is there too, so it's.
and then, let's
So it already has top space.
you can certainly go ahead and do right and left, but there's easy ways to
Oh yeah, I'm gonna show you again.
Okay.
So you can set, I mean, if you want it to be just like this, you can do this and this and then add it, but if you want it to be 20
So
here
now
too.
last step is, we did all of that now.
Also, nobody has a width and a height, so if you would add these again, you will get things sort of messed up, so don't
Okay,
do
that's
that.
what I asked you. Okay, so you just did extra.
Oh, so then I didn't do
So
other things.
well, let's update this we set this number here.
No, that's already done. If you don't have any points, your lines, your, things, you're good. You
So
know, it's probably
it's
gonna
going
be,
that
no
normally
real missing.
well,
This one.
See, this is, here's something, if you look at it, see how you have like too many, right? So you have it here, delete these that are like not so precise.
It's because you said
And
two big
I
spaces.
said like
Spaces.
Yeah.
here again.
So if you were to try it.
Very unattractive, but. Okay. So.
Yeah, so I put mine in space.
So
Yeah, it's really.
yeah. Okay, this one if I were you. And set a
So how do you?
1, 2, right, 2.
Even just the drag and drop.
Because if they have a similar gap on each side, the main
So we make this one gesture, this one right.
Yeah, and it's so great.
Yeah.
oh, and the width.
Exactly. And look at what's subtract the mouse, it's back to the mouse.
No, I do need a height
Oh, yeah.
because if we don't have the height, it's
Yeah.
because this is also centered horizontally, right? If the gap always stays the same on each side. So now if you have this, I think it should be good.
Okay, now, my vote should be, since you're, you
I
on my
just
thoughts,
drag
when
button.
I bought this, it's the same. Even if I put my iPhone, it's still. it's the same.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is, if you, okay.
Not selecting simply this.
It's our, I don't know. I know my crappy old computer.
Yeah, the biggest thing is, you want to enter your signature. Sometimes it's not so clear. Exactly. That was to say that's the hard box.
Yes.
Eddie, do you know how to create? I feel like this is a new computer and she didn't have it installed yet.
Oh, this is your new computer. Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's
thank
why,
you. I
that's
got
why
it.
it's not freezing.
I have a new computer and a silly Thunderbolt monitor.
So what's going on?
So there are no simulators.
You know, like, that's
Oh,
You probably need to download them. right?
Yeah, download preferences.
right?
New preferences, oh, sorry.
So I was doing it the other day.
But it's strange. 7.1. Why isn't there like
So make it.
This is Xcode.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I just wanted to make the, trying to make the nose.
I don't know, maybe 7, I don't remember. Maybe 7 is all.
So when the map goes up,
When it says downloaded, you will have your simulators. You cannot run on your iPhone because you probably just don't have developer account, do you?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
Yeah, and I entering it in. And I.
Oh, yeah, that's
Well, at some
yeah.
point in the next week,
Yeah.
It's a shit show. It's a shit show.
Okay, maybe I don't have one then. I just need to sign up.
But
Are you paying $10 a year?
oh, then we don't.
So you have to pay one.
So you
Free
can
one, yeah.
you cannot run on your phone if you don't pay $100.
Oh, you bastards. What are those two things to complete?
So the way you can already check it is no, this is for Xcode. You just have to wait for this guy to finish. But you can already check it using the simulate one, right? So another way to do it.
I might want to think if this one to
Or
That one's
Another
here.
shot?
That's around like that.
This is showing.
Horizontally, but
Yeah, okay.
We're trying this per day.
More than that.
And then you select the days that you
So
want
like,
to be all.
Because I haven't typed to this, and I have a
it's ready.
Sometimes it's so good.
When they're so good, it's so hard. Yes. It's how do you know?
2 days you go practically that guide.
And that's
Right? I mean, you could have a can be either way, so you like the legal Bible, but if integral, sit there, and then you can check,
I'm not sure what.
So let's say you drag your page, I think your comment is like in your Facebook, the key.
Yeah, these looks right.
So yes, it's not sure that. Yeah, this needs to be 20 pixels, right? So the difference here is not actually a frame. The frame is like the visual representation of where everything is. So
I think it's maybe
with the frame, takes a look at the constraints, see it should be 20 instead of 50, and just moves it over.
Move it over or stretch it out?
Everything looks different.
Does it move it over or stretch it out?
Move it over. I mean, depending on the constraint, if the width is different, it will
so
stretch it
mean
out.
space is
This
248
was
points.
try button, since that's
Let me
not
show
in
you
there.
this for a second.
You can add probably gesture that gesture to it.
Okay.
It's Facebook and stuff like that.
but you know that second thing, like, that you're in, right, so maybe.
So we have a meeting in the
Go for the, oh, I already got that.
but
Fine, right?
that's, so if you have a leading of 26 points for iOS, for iPhone, it's gonna be also as a leading pointer on screen.
Okay.
So usually you wanna do your leading on
So this
objects that are right next to the border or next to
Which is-
the object.
It starts with
All one X. So best,
I should have done like a center.
yeah, so best thing to do for this is just give
So that's almost there now. So it doesn't. So we get how it should be or how high because it doesn't have anything that way. So
and then just center it.
yeah, I think
So, yeah.
no, that's the actual height. Add to the list, the height of the actual.
The list of the research, and also, you want to at least two things are that figure that supported that. Basically, whenever you don't even turn them on, and so you don't have to add new buttons on it anyway, so it's basically an icon, something that.
So always go for like blue lines.
That's my thing, go.
Or if you go again, or
if I'm able to do that, basically, I'll follow you. So again, it's about getting some chunks. It's been questions for, they say here.
You wanna show what it's doing? Does it make sense with it? So just give it a width, and then I just set it horizontally.
Yeah, they look at the circles and color.
So you don't want this to be a fixed.
Does it make sense why the leading and sharing space?
Right, because I'm working on universal canvas. So I thought it would, pare everything down.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, because you were setting explicit constraints for the left and the right, so it wasn't making assumptions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, yes, you.
So,
So if you think about it really quick, if you think about it,
Yeah,
if your iPhone is, let's say, minus one person, and you are like, let's say iPhone is 250, right? You are at 250 for net leading, yes, 150 trailing, and you're almost at
So I'm trying to do a tap. I'm maybe you on the gesture there, so I will be able to time that. I'll tap on this, this is really useful. I started trying to, when I skip something.
So easiest way is to do a gesture from here,
Oh, okay.
and just drag the gesture up there.
Oh, okay, so when I was doing it,
Yeah.
really?
Well, you can do it automatically, but in this case, you already have it in your policy, so might as well drag it up.
Okay, I wasn't sure, or this, you prefer that? And then when we do our final project, do you prefer,
eyes automatically.
No, if you have your object, then it's probably more to that. You still have to do the action work, but you drag and drop is
No.
This was a serious conversation. That's how we chew that. But yeah.
All right, guys. Anybody want to share their masterpiece, their robot?
No, that's fine.
Nobody wants to share their masterpiece? No. All right. I'm very disappointed. Okay, I'll do a slide right now. So I want to create just another view controller, and I'll hold on to our Pac-Man for further examples. So I'll drag a view controller here. And I'll start the project on this view controller. So I have a blank canvas. So I'll do a UI view for my robot. Yeah. But you already have your project, so no need for you to create a new view controller. Just stick to where you are. Okay. And I'll do the background of this to, let's make the eyes blue. So I have one eye. And I'll duplicate this. I'll have my other eye over here. So first and foremost, I want to give one of these eyes an explicit width and height. And then I want to make the other eye equal the other object's width and height, right? So for my first one, I'll do that through my menu over here. And I'll also, while I'm here, I'll also set my top and left constraints. So I'll give it a top constraint of 20 points and a left constraint of 20 points. So now my left eye is positioned at the top left and has an explicit width of 85, and I'll go ahead and make the height 85 as well, so it's a square. I'll update. Does everybody understand what selecting items of new constraints do over here? Right? So if I don't select this and I make these changes, the objects in my interface builder don't change. They just get the orange outlines around them.
You told us to wait before we get items of new constraints.
Yeah, so there are actually instances where you might not want to update, right? So if what you're doing for here is you're just setting its location, but not its width and height, then your object will disappear, right? Because it doesn't have an explicit size anymore, and the frames will be updated. So there are situations where you may not want to right away update the frames in your interface builder, but most of the time you do. There's a good case to update. Right, so there's my eye. So now for this one, I'll give it the same width and the same height. So I can just shift, click. And then finally, I need to give it a top and right margin. So I'll do this through here as well. So I'll say 20 and 20.
You don't have to select white width and height there because it's being inferred. Yeah.
Exactly. Now something did happen here, which threw us off. So trailing space, 20 points is giving us a bit of an issue, right? So it's starting over here, right? So what's happening is pushing up screen. So the trailing space from the right side, if you want it to be 20 pixels from the right side, it's a negative 20. Right? So 20 points pushes it this way, so it keeps pushing to the right. So if I want this to be pulled 20 points to the left, it's negative 20. Tricky.
Is the same with the bottom?
No, it's not. Just with the trailing. It's reversed.
So if I do negative 20, right, positive 20.
I'll take a look in a second. It might be because you have a relation to something else as opposed to the super view.
Does it matter the way
Just
that you
to the other.
control that? Is this running two?
It does, yeah.
Because that's trailing space, and that's why it was negative moved to the left.
Exactly.
Whereas if it was the other way, this is space that would make it.
Exactly. All right. So I have my robot eyes. Next, I'll add my mouth.
Oh, 20 from the left.
Okay. So yeah, a robot has lipstick. Okay.
Looks like I found it.
Exactly. It's scary as kind. It's like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Okay, mouth, it's not gonna have a specific size or a specific width, right? Because our mouth is gonna span the full width of the face. So how do we arrange that? So yeah, we have a leading and a trailing constraint. That way our mouth size is flexible upon the size of the frame, right? So if I drag and drop from the mouth to the left side, I'll do leading. And to the right side, I'll do trailing. Let's make sure these are both the same distance. So I'll say these are 20 points. So now we're missing two constraints for the mouth. What are we missing?
The top and bottom.
The bottom for sure.
The bottom. Yep. So we have inferred width, but we don't have the height, right? So for the height, I'm just going to select height over here and keep it at the same size. Actually, I'll make it a bit small. It's a large mouth. Make it at 120. So why is it at the very top?
Because you didn't set the bottom, the trend.
Yep.
Bottom.
So now you see a use case where us updating our frames here before we're done with our constraints might be a bit more of a pain in the ass than us just pressing OK and then setting that first, right? So I want to set the height to 120 again, but I won't update my frames. And for the final step, I'm going to drag this to the bottom. All right. So now if I update my frames, we're almost there. Yep. And I made one mistake. I want to set the height to equals. Okay. So we have the height, but it looks like I have two heights here, so I need to remove one. Okay. And I'll come back and fix it in a second. It looks like our mouth is a bit off. So finally, the nose. I'll drag a view here. And what color should we make the nose? Yellow. All right. So I saw different people approach the nose problem different ways. So the first first fact we have is that the first rule we have is that the nose needs to be 50 points from the mouth, right? So how do I set that?
We drag an arrow from the nose
Yep. So I do vertical spacing. And now for the vertical object, set it to 50. Okay. So now our nose is 50 points from the mouth. There's 3 more things missing. We center the nose.
Well, if we provide both the width and height and the horizontal center, then we can provide both.
Yep. So right now we have the y-axis where our nose is going to go, but we don't have the x-axis, nor do we have its size, right? So I'm going to set its width and its height, and I'll make its height a bit smaller, 120. I'll make its width 90. And I won't update yet. So we see that when we made those updates, Xcode drew the outline of where our nose will go, right? So vertically it looks fine, right? It'll be on this level. The size looks fine. Now, what doesn't look fine is our X coordinate of our nose. So for us to set our constraint to be exactly positioned in the center of our super view, where do we drag to? Straight up or straight down, right? So we drag vertically. And we see the container. So now we see that our new nose, we see the dotted outline here, is right there. So now if I update my frames, looks a lot better. So we're almost there. So what's going on with our mouth? Why is our mouth all off? So we have a top space, a leading space, a trailing space, and a bottom space. That actually looks right.
Is the trailing space need to be -20?
Good call. Yep.
Why is that?
Because it's
Oh, 'cause
20 points from the right.
Yeah.
See, even I fell for that. Now if I refresh, it assumes correct proportions, right? Yeah.
In what case, I have trailing space and leading space both 30, both with respect to the super view and mine is correct. Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier.
Yeah, that's strange.
How did you have it dragged? Did you drag from?
But with them I used the bin one, and then you said it's 30 and not -30, right? Maybe that's why.
Yeah, so I think the difference is, although it shouldn't be, is right and left versus trailing and
Yeah.
leading. Do you know, Dustin?
I'd actually take a look at, we go into the little tool, there's a checkbox. To the edge of the screen one, and that will mess with you.
Yeah.
It's technical.
Is it in the bin tool?
Yes, sorry.
It's in the bin tool down.
In the pin tool.
Yeah. So if you,
Constraints and margins, yeah. Yeah.
This is best practice design check.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the way I explain it. Do
I'm sorry?
you want to explain it?
I'll try to, yeah. So with the iOS 8, Apple added in margins to standard UI views, and the idea is that when you start laying out the application, you probably saw that when you would just pull the box over to the edge, it has a set. Can you, Matt?
Yeah, you may, please. So
if we just add a UI view to the super view, the system interface builder expects there to be certain margins, left and right, and that's what the what was this thing called again? Constraint to margins is measuring. So if you look at the constraint there, that's only going up to the edge. So if I select this, use the pen tool and turn off constraint to margins, you can see that the left-hand side there went from 0 to 16.
Yeah.
Go ahead and add one constraint, and now it goes flush up to the edge.
that's right. Yeah. So there's also margins, which we're not going to worry about, and that's exactly what Dustin's getting at. So it's margin as opposed to the overall position relative to the frame. So that's a good call. I didn't realize that.
Things the best practices too. I'm checking.
It's no best practice. It's personal preference. Personally, I never use it. Do either of you guys ever use the?
I always use a pen tool, and I'm always with positive numbers on my right side. So I don't know if that reflects in having it checked over and checked.
Yeah, I use a pen tool all the time, and I'm usually.
You normally have negative margins on the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
I guess I have
doing
it.
the same thing.
Yeah. All right. So let's do the bonus really quickly. For the swipe gesture, super easy. We did a swipe gesture recognizer. I'm going to drag and drop to the mouth, so the mouth is what we swipe. And by default, it's swipe right. So I'm going to go to my view controller. I don't have a view controller for this one. So I'm just going to give this a view controller. That's bad practice. They're both now under the view controller class, so don't do this.
Don't do this at home.
Huh?
Don't do this at home.
Don't do this at home. I'm just being lazy. So I'm going to select my gesture here, swipe gesture recognizer. Drag it here, make it an action. And I'll call this swipe right on mouth. And we want to reference the mouth, right? So we drag the mouth here as an outlet.
Shouldn't we refer to constraint?
What?
What we did before was the constraint, right? Remember?
Yeah, I mean,
It wasn't the mouth itself, but.
I have the same question. If all you're gonna change about the mouth is its height, couldn't you just use the outlet to the height
Constraint.
value?
Well, I'm not changing the height. I'm changing the color for now.
Oh,
But yeah,
okay.
we could do that. We could do both. Okay. So in my gesture, I'm going to do self or robot mouth background color. Was UI color dot blue color. All right. And if we're gonna get fancy here, let's just animate this. Nice.
Get down better with Vader.
say 0.5. Now I'll put my animation, a color change in my animation. This UI view to animate iteration, is everybody clear on that? We've gone through this a few times already. Right, anything that goes in there animates. All right, so if I change orientation, my robot mouth, my robot face stays accordingly. Rob?
Is there a way to tie the height and the width to the view? Through
Yeah.
the interface color, like what we're doing.
So the height and the width of, for example, the mouth to the view.
So like if I wanted my eyes to be proportional to like the width of the screen, and then when I turn it over, the eyes are like wider.
Yeah.
And when I turn it back, they're.
Yeah, we'll go through the code this year.
But can you do that through the interface color, or is it only automatically?
Whenever I do it proportionally to the parent, I always do it programmatically. Interface builder, I don't believe lets you do that. So before jumping to doing all this programmatically, there's one more property I want us to go over. So here I want to go through a slightly different example. So I want to add a new UI view controller. And I'll start our code over here. So I want to create a quick login screen. So I'll do a text field. And then let's give this all a placeholder. So username, and then password. And let's also add constraints to these. So we'll add a constraint between these two, a vertical space constraint. We'll add a constraint between the top one and the top of our screen. And we'll also add a leading and trailing constraints. So let's do that very quickly. I created a new view controller. So to the top. I'll center this.
And those are text fields?
Yep.
Something the first step we did, move that up, top space, top layout guide.
So let me go through all this again. So the first one, I dragged the first text field to the top, and I did top space, top layout guide. And then I'm also going to add a trailing constraint. And yep.
You don't need a width.
Nope. So I'll make this 20 from each corner. Negative 20 on the right side. And then add some spacing between the password field and the username field, so vertical spacing. And I'll make this Leading is 20, yes, on each side. So leading.
That's so weird. It's weird. So I do negative numbers and mess everything up.
Yeah, I just.
Let me see here. 20 for leading, negative 20 for trailing. I just reversed, so 20. Yep, time vertically. So leading, for some reason I have double here. Twenty, leading. Obviously having issues here. Okay. Okay. So these have 50 points vertical spacing, and they both have 20 points leading space and trailing.
Leading between the other one was.
And the spacing, vertical spacing is at 50 for now. Just an arbitrary number. There's no method behind that.
Okay, just like Dave said, I just need to do positive numbers. I don't need to do negative.
So are you setting them from the pin over here, or are you dragging them?
On the right hand of the spectrum. You know, like a constant spectrum.
Yeah, so you're dragging onto.
Yeah, doing that, exactly. And then I go to the spectrum.
And then you have trailing
Yes.
space.
20.
There must be another universal setting for default for that. And let me look into that. I'm not sure why it's happening. Let's also add a button. And let's add this button to the bottom of the screen. And what we'll do is we'll edit 20 points from the bottom. So bottom space, and we'll make this 20. And let's also center this horizontally. And just to showcase here, what's going to happen is I want to make the background color for our button also a different color. So we'll make this black. 20. So center horizontally, 20 points from the bottom.
So when did you do update frames, it just moves it automatically?
Yep, when you do update frames. It's not doing that for you?
No. And then when I go to update frames, I don't have that option.
So yeah, whenever you do update frames, select the object.
Okay.
All right. So let's run this, make sure everything looks all right. All right, so we have our button. Now let's add another button, and let's call this button, you know, whenever you sign up for something for an app, there's usually like a terms of service before you accept everything, right? So we'll call this accept terms of service and sign in. That's a button. Or I'll just call this accept terms of service. Forget the sign in for now. There we go. And I'm going to change the background so we can again see what's going on. So, I'm sorry?
Yeah,
Oh, that's the second one.
So for the second button, let's pin this to the bottom. And again, make it 20 points from the bottom, just like our button. So it is 20. So now there's one more thing missing in our button.
Either reference to the button on the left or something like to position it.
Yeah. So we have positioned the button vertically, right? We pinned to the bottom, but we haven't positioned it horizontally yet, right? It's not pinned to our left button or to our right side, right? So let's go ahead and tie this to our right side for now. Now do trailing space.
Covers the black button.
So it's covering our black button. So let's go back and tie it to our left button, to our black button. So I'll highlight that and remove. And I'll drag to the left button. And we'll do horizontal spacing. And let's make the horizontal spacing 20 points for now. So over here, I want to do 20 instead of 35. So we see it's running off screen, right? So let's add one more constraint to our right, so it doesn't run off screen. Let's add a constraint, again, like we had for 20 points, trailing. So we have our yellow button is 20 points from the bottom, 20 points from our button, and 20 points from our right side, right? So now our text is being squished here, right? And that's because our button here is absolutely positioned in the center, right? We cannot change our button to the center. And our next button is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? So how do we make it so when our screen is large enough, our right button stays centered and this stays as is. However, when our screen is a bit more squished, when we have a portrait mode or a smaller device, we should be able to push this so we can see some more of this text, right? So this is where priority comes in for our constraints. We can set a priority for our button, and we can make it less in priority than this one, so that the button can actually get pushed to the side a bit more. So if I select my button, yep, and then go to my align center, And I'll set this to something like 400. You see Apple has defaults to high, low, required. So it says to 400. You see that it pushed it, it took precedence. And now when we go to the larger view, it goes back to center. So the priority property, we don't always use it, but when certain constraints might need to override the other one, this is where it comes in to be pretty useful.
So, and could I have, I don't know, could I have a, also, so one alignment, horizontal alignment is aligned to center, but we also have one that's like trailing to space, like 20, no, containing which is straight.
For which one? Sorry.
So what if I had two horizontal alignments, but one has higher priority than the other?
Two horizontal alignments.
So here, what we have is align X to center. So
Yeah.
let's say I also say, you know, the width needs to be 100 and more than 100, and then I drag to the left corner, and then I say I want it to be 20. But so those two would be conflicting, right? Because either it's going to be it's not always going to be 20 away. So maybe I could.
So the corner, you're saying if you had the button here,
Yeah.
20 points away, and then you had another trailing one, which was at the very end, or was it here?
No,
So the-
and we keep the align to center or something. So we could have two that are kind of like
No.
conflicting, but then I put one with a higher priority than the other.
You can't, no, because those are directly conflicting. Okay, they're not indirectly replacing each other. So Alexa's question was, what if I had a center alignment here and a leading alignment here? And the answer is, when you're dealing with two constraints that target the same thing directly, you cannot do that. Xbox, XWLU, it's interface to go there. We know it's my line. I actually haven't played Xbox in years. It only happens when things are indirectly, not necessarily conflicting, but indirectly being placed into each other. Now there is one more point that nobody caught, and I'm a bit disappointed, guys. So over here we set our bottom constraints and our trailing constraints, right? But what didn't we set? Height and width, right? So the reason for that is because there are certain objects that have something called an intrinsic size. And those objects are things like labels and buttons. And intrinsic size means that those objects change based on the content that's inside them. So if my label has 200 characters, it spans the full width of 200 characters. So that's an intrinsic size. And when an object has an intrinsic size, we don't need to set its height and width in our interface builder.
But we could still, for example, what if we want to reduce basically what if we want to have like space on both sides, you know, the text. So here we set hard-coded the width of our button, and then the text, you know, fills no matter how much we can.
Yeah, so you can just center the text in the button and it'll be centered. But the dangerous thing is if you have a button or a label that has an exact width and that text supersedes the width of the width that you set, then you'll see what we saw originally here. It'll be the trailing dots after the text.
So mine, I set a width for that one, and when it was in the portrait mode, it is smaller than the width that I set. And when it's landscape mode, it makes smaller.
Did you set the width through constraints, or did you set it through its attribute inspector? I'll take a look. Yeah, I'll take that. Cool. Questions?
How do you know if it's intrinsic size?
Sorry?
How do you know if the object has intrinsic size?
It doesn't have a width. You don't set a hard width. So whenever you set the width for the object, it's that by default is intrinsic sizes, then you override it. To remove that, you just remove the width property.
Oh, okay.
It should say standard on the little interface builder text box. So if nobody has any questions, I'd like to leave this as is and spend just a little bit of time next class to go over programmatically editing these constraints. I just want us at a high level understand what's going on here, what's necessary for us to edit constraints. Once we understand through interface builder how to do this, or exactly what we need, and code will be a lot easier. So I don't want to jump to code and rush it today. So next class, we're going to hand out the midterm projects. So I think we could spend the first half of the class talking about programmatically editing constraints, and then start planning our midterm projects afterwards.
And then Hangman is due on Thursday.
Did everybody get a chance to look at Hangman? Any questions on that? All right, so I think this is like the first class ever that we're going to finish early.
Yeah, this is the first time ever. I'm blown. My mind's blown.
I feel like, actually, I don't know, just because I've been practicing more doing stuff programmatically, but I feel like the constraints are easier programmatically.
Yeah, I mean, for me, they're easier because everything is just like there, it's visible, and you can directly change everything. But you need to first understand what's going on at a high level before you can see what's going on programmatically.
Yes. You probably know, like, off the top of your head, like, how wide text labels should be, and, you know, like, so when you're coding that, it probably comes really easy.
I know nothing off the top of my head. I know what I sketch out.
Okay.
That's why, again, even with this, so sketching out, it's much easier sketching stuff out and like really quickly outlining, like, you know, this will be this much, this will be this much, this will be related to this, these two will be related to each side. And if I add like 2 more objects, these 2 could be related to each other. So it's really easy for me to do this on pen and paper before I jump into editing constraints, right? So again, get really comfortable with doing stuff on paper before you lay that on interface builder or even code.
What layer or like step do you start to think about constraints?
From the very beginning, whenever I start adding objects to my interface builder or to code, I think about constraints right away.
Okay.
It's like second nature. And the cool thing is, we'll go over this when we go through code. Remember how when we add our objects programmatically, we have to give it a frame, right? Well, instead of the frame, we can set the constraints because all the frame is doing is placing it. So instead of doing, you know, frames, direct, whatever, is we could do, you know, my variable is UI label, and then set the constraints for label for the frame. Because all the frame is X and Y width and height, right? And what are constraints? Same thing, essentially, but with a relationship to each other. Cool. So what are benefits of auto layout over springs and struts? Yeah, everything is related to each other, right? Which makes it super helpful, but also potentially more confusing, right? Because everything will be kind of interrelated. Which ones do you guys prefer so far? Auto layout. I haven't yet. Honestly, since auto layout, I mean, the first year it was a big pain in the ass because it wasn't stable. But like the past year, it's been really simple to work with. I don't know, Thomas, Dustin, you guys, have you used springs and struts since auto layout came out?
No.
Yeah, I haven't either. Yeah. Well, the first like few months, it was a big pain in the ass. I don't know if you guys remember that. It was like full of bugs. So I was going back and forth. But after the first couple months, it's been totally stable, totally easy to work with. All right, so our first class, we finished on time.